Oh, good. And as people come in, can they hear us right now? Okay.
My understanding is we're live, so I think you can get
We're live,
started.
okay. Excellent. Well, we'll give a couple of minutes for people to be logged in, and then we'll start, right?
I'd say just go.
Go. Okay, well, hey, welcome everybody. It's a real pleasure to have Congresswoman Suzan DelBene with us for a virtual town hall dedicated completely to the question of climate change. This is a great opportunity. Thank you all for attending. Looks like there's even more people logging on than we anticipated. This is fantastic. Basic format, this will last, town hall will last 60 minutes. It's being held as a webinar. I and Lee Alley will serve as monitors, taking your questions to the Congresswoman. We'll ask your questions that you've submitted and any questions that you put in the Q&A that we can get to of the Congresswoman. We will start with the pre-submitted questions, but hopefully get to some that come up in the chat. If you submit a question in the Q&A section, put your email address in to enable Representative DelBene to respond via email if we run out of time. Also put your town, full name, town, and that email address. We want to keep the questions focused on the topic of climate and energy policies. And we want to focus on policy questions, not questions related to the campaign and the election, even though elephant in the room, we're all thinking about it. And we will not, just in the interest of time and trying to get everybody's questions there, she will not be able to answer repeat questions. So I'm Mark Vossler. Some of you know me. I'm a cardiologist working in Kirkland and also a full-time climate advocate. Lee Alley is with us. He's a retired physicist and engineer, worked with the U.S. Army Research Lab and had a long career in academic institutions. He actually did research in renewable energy, and since he's retired, he's been focusing on community volunteering and is the founding leader of the Snohomish chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. And it is my pleasure to introduce Representative DelBene. Suzan DelBene was sworn into Congress in November of 2012 and has represented the 1st District of Washington since then. She currently serves on the Ways and Means Committee and is vice chair of the New Democrat Coalition. Prior to public service, she worked in the biotech and software industries, including a period of time as a vice president at Microsoft. Lots of experience and actually a great elected official to work with. So Representative DelBene, you're on with your opening remarks.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark and Lee and everyone out there for joining us on this incredibly important topic of climate change. I represent the 1st Congressional District of Washington State, which is the most beautiful district in the country. That's how I always describe it. So hopefully we'll have a lot of shared agreement with that today. But I really appreciate Mark, you and Lee helping set up this event. I'm going to keep my opening remarks short because I want to make sure we focus on questions, but I'm here today to talk about the climate crisis and what we're doing or need to do in Congress to address this very much existential threat to our planet and to preserve our national environment for generations to come. We are running out of time to decrease our carbon emissions and avoid irreversible damage to our planet. According to climate scientists, and I think the important word there is science and the importance of science. So the work that you're doing through the Citizens Climate Lobby is critical at this moment. It's really been a terrible shame to see what the president has done to undo many of the steps that the Obama administration had taken to combat climate change. The Trump administration's consistently opposed new efforts to address this crisis, frankly, has even refused to acknowledge that there is a crisis. So this past Saturday marked 3 years since Trump repealed the Clean Power Plan. And we know in our region, sea levels are rising, our oceans are becoming more acidic. We're seeing an increase in insect outbreaks and tree diseases. This endangers not only our local economy, potentially costing us thousands of jobs, but it also affects our way of life in our uniquely Northwest way. The recent wildfires that we saw across Washington and the West Coast are another painful example of the results of a rapidly changing climate. Already this year, over 823,000 acres have burned in Washington state. That's more than 15 times the size of Seattle and almost 3/4 the amount of land that burned during the state's record-breaking fire season of 2015. So add this to the record flooding in the Midwest and the stronger hurricanes on the East Coast, and you begin to see the full scale of the impact that humans are having on our planet. So at the same time as all this, we have to address our crumbling infrastructure. We have millions of Americans out of work because of the coronavirus and the resulting economic impact. So these are separate issues, but they're also not separate issues. If we can address the climate crisis, update our crumbling infrastructure, we can also reignite our economy, make sure that everyone's connected. We need to make new investments in a green America. And so one of the first votes I took this Congress was to create the Select Committee on the climate crisis to make sure that we have a critical tool in highlighting this issue and bringing new solutions to the table. In the House, we've advanced legislation recently that put us on a path towards collectively addressing these issues. And many ideas that were championed by the New Democratic Coalition, of which I'm a vice chair, and serve as the chair of policy, have been included in some of our legislation. So I'm focused on making sure we get to yes on finding a solution to this growing threat. So with that, I want to get to your questions. I'm going to turn it back to Mark, but I also want to highlight that we're going to make sure we respond to all your questions. So if we don't get to them as part of this, this live event, we will, if you make sure your questions are in the chat, we will get back to you. My office will get back to you. And also my office, you can always talk to my office. It's at delbene.house.gov on the web. There's a place there you can submit questions and find information. So also please use that as a resource. If we don't get to something or you think about something later, feel free to reach out to us that way. And I'll turn it back to you, Mark.
Thank you. Number one, before I ask the first question, just thank you so much for making the time. It's, we're thrilled to just have an hour devoted to this issue. I know a lot of people attending this town hall have been working on climate change for a while, and this is a great opportunity. So thank you so much. Another thing we're really thankful for is this recent package of legislation that just was passed, the Clean Economy and Innovation Act, also the previous Moving Forward Act. And frankly, not all of us know what's all in this rather extensive package. I was wondering if you could start out by just telling us a little bit more about this bill that just passed.
Well, actually, I'll talk about 3 bills that we passed, because one actually really passed all the way and was signed by the president, which is a rarity these days, which is the Great American Outdoors Act. It passed Congress in July, and the president signed it into law. And the reason I want to bring that one up is because it is really important resources to help make sure that we have resources to help with maintenance in our national parks. I represent the North Cascades National Park, but also the bill fully and permanently funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund, what we all affectionately call LWCF. It's been a long-term priority of mine to make sure we do that, because it ensures that non-taxpayer dollars go towards it. It comes from oil and gas money that's paid into Land and Water Conservation Fund. And so we want to make sure that money was used for its intended purpose, which is to make sure that we have resources to help with conservation projects, many that have been used right here in our region to support great projects in our communities, as well as make sure that we support projects on our public lands. The bill that we passed recently in the House that you were talking about, the Clean Economy, Jobs and Innovation Act, was really an incredibly important piece of legislation. I said earlier, we set up this Congress select committee. That means it's a committee that only exists for this Congress. It would have to be set up again to come again in the next Congress. But the select committee, it was a committee solely focused on the climate crisis. And they helped lead the effort in bringing a lot of ideas that we had throughout the House together in a package that's called the Clean Energy Jobs and Innovation Act. The bill makes new investments in clean energy, improves the efficiency of our homes, our schools and businesses, modernizes outdated infrastructure, reduces our carbon footprint, and prioritizes environmental justice. Some of the key provisions that I guess I'd point out, it is authorizes over $4 billion for research and development to advance cutting edge renewable energy technologies, including solar and wind, geothermal and hydropower. It brings clean, reliable energy to marginalized communities, including $25 million in energy storage and microgrids in rural communities, and $1 billion for solar installations in low-income communities. It sets new energy efficient standards for buildings and provides funding for schools and homes and commercial buildings to improve efficiency. Invest in carbon capture technology, including direct air capture to help reduce net emissions, and requires federal agencies to integrate environmental justice into their mission. I'm sure we'll talk about environmental justice more as well, but we have been behind in our investments and support for clean renewable energy. And this legislation was really a chance for us with legislation to lead. And then the last bill, and that bill has the House, but it has not passed through the Senate. So it is awaiting the Senate. We have a lot of bills, unfortunately, that are sitting on the doorstep of the Senate. The other one is the Moving Forward Act, which is really a sweeping infrastructure bill that we passed in the House last July. And when we talk about infrastructure, think of infrastructure broadly, because this includes $70 billion to transform the electric grid, to accommodate more renewable energy, strengthen existing infrastructure, develop an electric vehicle charging network. We wanted to make sure that when we talk about infrastructure, we talk about clean drinking water. And so we have dollars in there to help address that and remove dangerous contaminants from local water systems. And another issue is affordable housing. So I always say that because people think of infrastructure and they think that means roads and bridges, and broadband, housing, schools, water, energy are all key areas that we addressed in the Moving Forward Act, because we know that this is an incredibly important issue, especially in our region where it can be hard to get around, and we know our infrastructure is behind. And also in a district, I represent Northeast King County up to the Canadian border. There are parts of our district that have great broadband connectivity. There are also parts of our district that have none. And so when we talk about the need to address the disparities that we see in our communities, this is another place where these resources are greatly needed. But so at least that's a quick, maybe kind of quick answer to your question on some of the bills that we've been working on recently.
Thank you, thank you. Is there a place that we could find the text, the language, and maybe Nick or another staff member?
Yeah, maybe someone can post the bill numbers for the Moving Forward Act. That was one of we had 10 bills that we passed that we thought were critically important. And so HR2, HR1 would be the first bill we passed in the House. So HR2 is reserved for the Moving Forward Act. So if you look up HR2, you should be able to find the details there. And then we'll get you all the information on we have a kind of 2-pager on the Clean Energy Jobs and Innovation Act, and the Great American Outdoors Act, also a lot of information there. So we can put some links into the chat so you have more information to follow up on.
Fantastic, fantastic. So second question is from my co-moderator here, Lee Alley from Snohomish. He noted that the new Democrat coalition declared its ultimate goal for the US is to attain net zero emissions by 2050. And that this summer, the House Select Committee on the climate crisis issued its action plan for the whole of Congress. The technology modeled in that plan, include the plan's policy actions, would lay a groundwork for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. But laying groundwork and achieving are two different outcomes. And so he asked a 2-part question. In your new Democrat coalition role, what is your assessment to the extent that the coalition's climate goal of net zero emissions by 2050 would or would not be fulfilled by the policies that are in the Select Committee's climate action plan? And then more of an understanding for your constituents of who does what. What is the operational relationship, say, between the new Democrat coalition and the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and how do these coalitions and committees work together to achieve the goals?
Okay, great question. And Lee, you can jump in if I start going up and miss something that you also want to cover. First, let me talk operationally about how things work. As I said earlier, I'm a vice chair of the New Democrat Coalition. We are a group of 104 Democrats in the House. And so we are a group who've been focused on innovation and forward-looking Democrats. And so we represent a cross-section of the entire country. We're a large coalition, about half of the Democratic caucus. So we have task forces that focus on various issues and bring people from across our coalition to engage. And one of our task forces is focused on climate change. Then all of us as members of the New Democrat Coalition also serve on different committees throughout the House. And one of those committees is the Select Committee. As I said earlier, the Select Committee as a special committee, it was only set up for this Congress, so it may not necessarily continue. But we also serve on committees that are standing committees. I serve on the Ways and Means Committee. We do a lot of work on things like tax policy and economic policy. And so our members also are collectively on those committees. So we all multiple points of contact, not only the coalition we work with, but all the different members we work with on committees. And some bills, and you'll see actually if you look up some of the bills I was talking about, pieces of those bills are parts of different committees. For example, tax pieces of the infrastructure bill, the Ways and Means Committee has jurisdiction over them. Other pieces are from the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. So we all work on the areas kind of where we have expertise and deep insight, and then work together to move legislation forward and inform each other. So the bill, the climate action, the plan that the committee came up with is really a collection of ideas from all over. So the committee really took a lot of those ideas and brought them together to develop the plan. And it's really a comprehensive set of policy recommendations to move us towards achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. It's an ambitious goal. I think the report says that, but there are several steps that we put in place to ensure that we reach the goal. And I would say also as a legislator, and this is maybe a policy that always guides me, is we need to put policies in place and then have milestones where we check to see if things are on track and going in the direction we expect. Maybe we have new learnings, something is working better than we expected, not as well as we expected, to understand why, so we can adjust and move on course. And that's why it's so important to get started soon, because then we have a chance to take ideas that a lot of people have worked on and see what we can do to help make sure that they're working towards us achieving the goal. The committee's plan includes proposals on how to decarbonize our power and transportation sectors, to ideas on how to leverage our agricultural resources to act as carbon sinks and get us to net negative emissions. We know that we have to make sure that we have a investment in infrastructure to build a cleaner, more resilient electricity and transportation sector. And so some of these ideas came from the New Dems, some of those ideas are in there, some came from committees and others together, so it really is a compilation for a lot of folks. We had about 20 of the New Dem priorities that were included in the committee's report, including things like leading the international community in confronting climate change, the risk it poses to our planet, transitions to a climate-forward economy, what we can do on workforce development to help our communities and help innovation. So all of those things came together in a pretty comprehensive package. And one of the things also that has come from some of that work is the legislation I was talking about, which is the Clean Energy Jobs and Innovation Act.
That's very helpful. Thanks for the explanation. I do have, I guess, a follow-up question. in terms of your goals as a member of the House, do you have some specific goal that you would like the legislation you co-sponsor to work toward, like how many degrees Celsius global warming, or by what year do we reach net zero? Do you have some specific final milestone of your own in mind as you try to support different legislation?
Well, I think the question is, there's kind of two pieces to that. One, I would say the sooner the better on anything that we can, but then there's the reality of what can we actually do? What do experts think we can do? And what are steps that we can take to move us on the path? And that's why I think the net zero by 2050 came out as part of their report. But that is not necessarily, doesn't have to be the only milestone. I actually think I look to scientists and members of the community. I'd love to see us have interim milestones along the way to see if we're on track. And to my point, to check in to see if things are working. I don't think we ever should have milestones far out without having interim milestones to know whether we're really going to get there. You don't want to wait till 2050 and say, gosh, we didn't get there. You want to know that we have a milestone for how far along the path we need to be in 5 years and 10 years, et cetera. And that's where I think when we put these policies in place, we need to then back them up with the research and understanding that we get from experts in the community on how quickly we should be able to meet these interim milestones, and then check back in and see if we're getting there.
That's very helpful, and I really like your idea of the milestones. That's very positive.
Well, I'm a big milestone fan with pretty much anything, because sometimes policy passes and then nobody goes back to see if it actually did what we wanted it to do. And so I think it's going to be even more important than ever when we look at climate for us to see if the ideas we're trying are working, and adjust course along the way so that we do achieve our goals.
Great.
Thank you.
This is a good segue to the next question submitted. This is from David Malcolm from Kirkland. And he said, we recognize that the policies in the recently passed bill will assist the needed decarbonization of our lives and the economy. But I question whether it alone will enable us to have our carbon footprint by 2030. Is this bill compatible with Washington State's Clean Energy Transition Act, which requires all electrical production in our state to be carbon neutral by the year 2030?
So thanks, David, for the question. And first, I'd say I don't know that there's any one bill that has to be the only thing that we do to help achieve our goals. I think that it's going to be a collection of policies and work, and definitely state level efforts are going to be critically important too. Washington's created a bold plan to have carbon-free electricity, and we know that we wish there was more leadership in the White House right now on this issue. We have to acknowledge the issue to have that leadership, but I think we could see much more federal progress if we have an administration that cares about the climate crisis, and our federal agencies are also working to move forward on this effort. We took bold step forward during the Obama administration to reduce our carbon footprint and invest in renewable energy, but President Trump has undermined that progress, even things like pulling out the climate or the Paris Agreement. And so we're ceding our global leadership on this issue. So states have really taken a lead, and obviously our state, where this is a huge priority and our citizens have rallied behind this, including all of you, Washington State has taken a lead, which I strongly support. And I'm hopeful that we can make sure our federal government is taking a leadership role again. The bill I was talking about, the Clean Economy, Jobs, and Innovation Act, invests in clean energy, efficiency of our homes, schools, businesses, prioritizes environmental justice. I think it is a complement to the state's efforts, which would help make it faster for everyone and hopefully reduce costs. So also, I think these efforts, especially efforts of the federal, help bring along other states that may not be as forward-looking as Washington State, because I do think that we can learn a lot if we are sharing best practices and coordinating information across the country. I also think that's true if we do that internationally, then that collective effort will help us move forward more quickly. So I do think it's complementary. I'd love to see the federal government doing more. But unfortunately, we've gone backwards more recently.
Thank you. Next question is from Brenda Kostelecki of Redmond. She notes that we have seen that legislation that passes with bipartisan support tends to be more durable and less likely to be modified or revoked. Given the urgency of vastly reducing fossil fuel use to stable the climate changes that we're already seeing, what concrete actions will you take to build bipartisan support for strong climate legislation?
Well, first, Brenda, I agree with you because we know that if it's bipartisan, we're not going to have this ongoing back and forth. I think healthcare has probably been the best example where we kind of, it's, repeal this idea of repeal and replace. We can't say is something working or not working. We just say if it's someone's idea, we don't like it and we're going to get rid of it. Clearly, that would be a terrible way to move forward. And just the uncertainty that comes would make it harder for the private sector to invest in solutions, et cetera. So I do think that being able to achieve bipartisan solutions is absolutely puts us all in the strongest position. It's been a huge challenge, to be frank, given that I'm a scientist. That's how I started my career in doing biomedical research. We can't agree on the data, the kind of the fundamentals that you'd think we would start with that would allow us to really have a bipartisan approach. Unfortunately, this has become much more politicized, and it's been very challenging to make sure that we have bipartisan support even for pretty straightforward bills. I mean, I think the Paris Agreement is pretty straightforward, and yet we ended up having the president pull out of that without a lot of folks standing up against that on the other side of the aisle. So I do think that if you talk to folks who aren't in Washington, D.C., if you talk to folks here who have very differing political views, I think many folks understand because they see day to day the impacts of climate. Our farmers see the impacts and maybe conservative politically in a lot of ways, also know day to day what's happened for decades and see the changes that are happening. And so I come back and I say, what are the consequences if we don't do anything? And how do we really push past a political divide and focus on the data and the science to bring people together? The wildfires that we've seen, what can we do to address that? How do we make sure that we keep our ecosystems stable? So I do think that the science and the data are clear. And if we can help kind of focus on that versus the politics, I would hope that we could get more people to come along. But because I do agree that that helps us have the strongest response going forward. But it is a challenging environment, I guess, is probably an understatement right now on this issue. And I'm sure everyone has heard even the words being removed from documents, the words climate change, et cetera, just the very challenging environment we're in. So I look forward to a time when we can get past that, hopefully very soon, so we can actually work together on policies. Because I also see this as an economic opportunity, and that should be another area where we have strong bipartisan support.
Excellent. So given that the idea for having this event came from Citizens Climate Lobby, you knew we'd be asking about carbon fees, and Ed Belcher from Kenmore submitted the following question. He says, economists have been telling us for years that a price on carbon will be necessary to halt global warming. Representative Ted Deutsch introduced HR 763, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, in the past two Congresses. And I think at the end of the previous and very beginning of this Congress, HR 763 steadily increases the carbon fee starting at $15 per ton and reaches $315 per ton after 30 years. This would reduce CO2 emissions sufficient to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. 100% of the revenue would be rebated to households. We are happy to see that 7 out of the 11 members of the new Democrat coalition leadership team are co-sponsors of HR 763, and 7 out of 17 members of the task force, the New Democratic Coalition Task Force for Climate Change, are also co-sponsors of this bill. Please tell us where a carbon fee and dividend fits in your overall plans for addressing the climate crisis in the next Congress.
No, thank you. And I just want to give a shout out to Mark because we talk about the legislation regularly. So it's important. I really appreciate all the work that everyone's done. And I think that it is a strong bill. There's a few other bills out there as well. I think Congressman Panetta also has a bill. I think that we, and on the committee that I serve on the Ways and Means Committee, we really have a key role when we talk about what the economic incentives that are going to be put in place, or whether or not we put a fee on carbon, the impact that that can have in terms of making sure we move towards a clean and renewable future. And so I do think it's a hugely important tool. For me, I think we want to look at what the comprehensive opportunity is to provide the incentives that are necessary and make sure we're making the investments that are necessary. So, for example, in Congressman Deutsch's bill, the one that you brought up in the question, resources would go back into communities that are impacted, very important. We also need to make investments in research and in helping clean renewable energy type sources get to scale. So that's another area where we have to talk about where the money comes to invest there. And it doesn't all necessarily have to be in one bill. So that's one thing. It could be a set of bills where we talk about how we make energy investments in research and development, how we have incentives like we've had in things like wind and solar to help industries to scale that maybe are more early in their life cycle, and so they don't have the ability to kind of capture those cost savings that they would get when they're at scale. This is a big reason why folks talk about, oil and gas not needing tax credits. Maybe that they were put in place at a time to help things scale, but they don't need them. But some renewable energy does, so that it can be competitive on the market. And as it's competitive, we see increased usage, and that allows them to scale and work on distribution networks and other things to help grow. So collectively, I think we've got to have the financial incentives, and a price on carbon is one of those. I think we've got to be able to invest in communities that are impacted, and some of the work that we've done on both the Moving Forward Act, the infrastructure bill, and the Clean Economy Jobs and Innovation Act are also have resources to address the environmental justice issues, the communities that have been disproportionately impacted because environmentally and as well as contamination, et cetera, to make sure that we are helping those communities out. So the question is, what are the best pieces to put that forward? One of the big frustrations that I think we've had is that we haven't been able to have these rich debates that we normally would as we're moving legislation. We had our first hearing on the climate crisis in the Ways Committee, this Ways and Means Committee. This Congress hadn't been one for years because there just wasn't the focus and energy there. So I do think that this is a strong bill. I think that we have some other bills that we want to continue and put in the mix so that we find a comprehensive, durable solution to the problem. And then we do what I said earlier, which is track to see whether it's working the way that we expected in terms of incentivizing change. So I think this is a strong proposal. As I said, there are some other bills. I'm happy to help push forward so we get a solution. I would love to see us bring all of these to the table and have a healthy debate about the differences between some of the bills, what we think the right thing is, and what package of bills we need to put together so that we really start moving forward, I guess stealing a word from from that other bill, so that we really start moving forward on addressing, putting things in place so we're learning and we're starting to see an impact of these pieces of legislation. So yes, I do think that's an important proposal that's put forward. And my hope is that in a Congress, if we have more folks in this next Congress who realize what an important priority this is, that we can actually start to coalesce around specific pieces of legislation and get them all the way through so we can start seeing them in practice, being put into practice.
So it sounds like a carbon fee would fit in with the overall package.
I am definitely open on how we get there, and I think that there's many solutions which have a price on carbon as a way to get there, which is understandable given the environmental impact and the climate impact that carbon has, that we are making sure those resources are coming back into the economy so we can come up with alternative solutions and help them, like I said, scale and help communities out as well.
Great. The next couple of questions really deal with some local impacts in our state. The first of those is from Brooke Banbury from Redmond. And she says, wildfires have been blamed on poor forest management. We know that climate change leading to longer, hotter summers and droughts is also playing an important role. The impact of fires is not contained in the forests, resulting in the destruction of homes and very unhealthy levels of air pollution. What can Congress do to help Washington and other Western states reduce the number and the severity of fires?
Well, first of all, we can acknowledge that we have a climate crisis and do a lot of the work that we've already talked about. And the reason I say that, you see kind of the current debate, some folks have said, well, this has nothing to do with a climate crisis. It's purely about forest management. But actually, we see rising temperatures, we see greater stretches of drought, and then separate periods of great flooding. So more dramatic impacts that are severely stressing our forests. And so with those rapid changes, we understand, and the forests under great stress, that makes it even harder for our forests to be resilient. And even storms, right? If we see greater lightning storms, et cetera, that also creates a scenario that potentially, especially with drought, et cetera, that can increase the chance of wildfires. So one, we have to recognize that there's a climate impact component to it, and all the things we've talked about up to date could help address that. Specifically in wildfires, I'm a co-sponsor of the Wildfire Defense Act. That's a bill that would invest $1 billion per year to establish guidelines for communities so that they can develop community wildfire defense plans, working with community members, first responders, and state agencies. We also need to, it's very important that we have a lot of public awareness, because we know that folks have also inadvertently started fires by not understanding the consequences of their actions, especially as we've seen these extended dry periods. The bill would also provide up to $250,000 to develop plans and grants up to $10 million to implement them for communities. We also need to invest in the Forest Service. We've reduced our investment in the Forest Service, and in our district, the Mountain Baker Snoqualmie is a beautiful part of our district. But it's been harder and harder as the Forest Service has less resources to do a lot of work that they do to maintain access, other things that also help when folks need to fight fires. So those investments are important too in our lands, but we have to acknowledge the impact that climate has had and make sure that we're taking the steps across. That's why I talk about comprehensive so much, because this is another area that is impacted because we haven't taken steps forward.
Thank you. The next question is from Brenda Vanderloop, 21 Acres Farm in Woodinville. And she notes that the practice of regenerative agriculture is imperative to our farm's commitment to healthy soil and agricultural carbon sinks as a climate solution. What support, funding, farmland preservation can we anticipate for the Washington farmers practicing and transitioning to regenerative farming?
So great question, and an incredibly important issue, because part of why we're the most beautiful district is also we have incredible agriculture in our district. We have incredible soil, and that's not something that you can just move from one place to another. So one, we have to protect our farmland, realize the important resource that we have here, and make sure it's protected. Many parts of our agriculture in our region are close to bigger population centers, and so protecting that area is very, very important. This issue in particular got a lot of attention and was highlighted in the select committee's report, that action plan that we were talking about earlier. In the appropriations bill that we passed most recently, that's the bill we passed to fund the government, it included a provision that will require the Secretary of Interior to study the state of soil health on federal lands, because soil health is so critically important. And you talk about the regenerative side, making sure that we have agricultural practices that are keeping that soil healthy. The study, I think, has to take into account grazing, wildfire, recreation, invasive species, the impact they have on soil, and recommendations that they would put forward then for things we can do legislatively to help improve soil health, increase carbon sequestration, obviously important as we talk about climate, and improve the community benefits of soil health programs on federal lands. So that's important. We've got to make sure that we support our farming community, that is making sure that with the work that they're doing to make sure that they're maintaining healthy soil. And I just think we have a great agricultural community in our region who realizes how important this is. And so I do think we have an opportunity right here in our region to lead on these issues by talking about the work that we're doing to maintain our agricultural communities, to maintain this incredible natural resource that we have, as well as make sure that we are creating fresh, healthy foods that help keep our communities healthy as well.
Thank you. We're delighted to hear your interest in regenerative agriculture, because I think most of the folks attending want to see that as part of the solution.
Well, I had the benefit of serving on the Ag Committee when I was first elected. So spent the first 4 years of my time in Congress on the Ag Committee and got to go deeply into these issues. So we have incredible opportunities here. And I think it is important that it was highlighted by the Select Committee, but we continue to highlight it because sometimes people forget the incredible impact that agriculture can have as we are looking for long-term solutions.
Thank you. The next question comes from Nancy Hansen and really deals, Nancy is from Kenmore. It deals with how the federal government can help state and local governments achieve their climate goals. She says, people want to see a Green New Deal, or better, a plan that includes an economic agenda as well. The recent House resolution, Transform, Heal, and Renew by Investing in a Vibrant Economy, Thrive, does just this and has been co-sponsored by 80 House members. In our city of Kenmore, people are in favor of going ahead with strong plans to keep in step with King County's climate goals, but the city is unable to fund much of this. A program like Thrive could create the human resources required for much of the manpower needed. Please give your opinion on where you stand with this resolution that includes an economic agenda as well as climate justice goals. Will you agree to support Thrive?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. And I think you're making an important connection between the climate crisis and our economy. And as I said at the beginning, these aren't separate issues. I actually think these are intimately entwined, in that we can have a clean, renewable economy. And I actually think our region has the opportunity to lead there. So I think it's an economic opportunity as well as a imperative to protect our climate. For too long, I think people thought of moving towards green energy as something that didn't have an economic opportunity and would hurt our economy. I, again, think these are complementary. And so if we support the innovation that we've seen in this area, I think we can decrease our carbon emissions while building a new green renewable energy economy that have great paying jobs and helps to rebuild our infrastructure as well, with a modern infrastructure that helps lead us further into the future. Some of the bills that I mentioned earlier, the Clean Economy, Jobs and Innovation Act and the Moving Forward Act, are designed to address these issues collectively. I've looked at some of the climate and the justice goals of Thrive, and that's a resolution. It's not kind of a specific policy proposal in terms of how you achieve those goals. And so I think that some of the pieces of legislation I've been talking about actually have specific implementations of programs to help achieve those goals. So I support the principles of Thrive, and the underlying legislation that we've been talking about includes many of those principles. So, but I want to also emphasize that I want us to move from principles to action. I know we have a lot of opportunity to talk about those principles, and I think many times we are in very much agreement about them. I think the focus right now is what specifically are we doing to take action to move forward? What, as Lee talked about before, what are the metrics that we're shooting for? What are the programs we're putting in place? And to continually to look at that over and over. Are we hitting those metrics? Are we meeting our goals? Are we living up to our principles? I'm definitely impatient to get further down the road on making progress here.
Mark, I have a follow-up question if we have time.
Please go ahead.
With regard to the relationship between the local and the federal agencies, it's very pleasing to see that there's a lot of coalitions being formed at the federal level, both sides of the aisle, and that's apparently going to continue. And then we're seeing a little bit more in our county council, in our county, a little bit more attention to the environment. So there's some action there. And then the city manager for the town where I live is talking about action. But you know, as a scientist, that what the county does, what the city does, what the state does, and what the federal does, those are scientifically linked. And what one does can affect the other. But how much confidence can you give us that we have in place the organizational collaboration coordination mechanisms? So, because the New Deal, or the New Democrat coalition, is all federal Congress people. Mm-hmm. In what way does the county and the state and the federal level need to work together more closely or coordinate than has historically been the case?
I think it's a great question. I think we have some models that we can work on that that in other sectors that have worked well. So if you look, for example, at transportation infrastructure in particular, federal programs generally provide dollars, but also put requirements on. You can use these dollars, but you must do X, Y, and Z. But the decision on what projects are funded, which one's going to be a priority, those are made at the state and local level. So since you're in Snohomish, if you're going to talk about Highway 2, for example, and the trestle, which I know is an important area there, the federal dollars supplement state and local dollars on these projects, but a lot of the day-to-day work on those projects will be at the state and local level, but resources will come federally. And I think as we look at in these areas as well, the programs we put together provide the dollars for folks to move forward. We can make sure that we have metrics. We can have grants to help supplement some of the work. I talked a little bit about some of those grants that are available and some of the bills that we have. Many times we're putting out resources at the beginning for pilot projects, so we actually learn from these efforts what's working and what's not working, or why something works here and doesn't work there. That can help inform federal policy. So when we scale, we actually have a lot of data to build on, and that's an important partnership that we have with state and local government. And sometimes then we'll provide resources and say these resources go towards these types of programs, but state and local government will decide exactly which of those, how those dollars are going to be used specifically in their communities. So it is a close partnership. I think one thing that's important for the federal government to be clear on is that we get data back, as I said, kind of so that we are able to understand what's working and not working, because we can collect that data from all over. That if we are smart about collecting those metrics, that helps inform everyone, so not everyone has to reinvent the wheel over and over. And we then can say these types of projects have given us a better return on investment than other types of projects and have gotten better results. And when I say return on investment, it might be getting us closer to our metrics. It may not just be a financial objective. then we can make sure that we drive programs towards in that direction in the future. So I do think it's an important partnership. And really, our local communities are where the work happens and where a lot of the innovation happens too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Just noting that we're at 5:50, so we're probably only going to take maybe one or two more questions. There's already some excellent questions in the Q&A. Just ask all the audience participants, if you put your email address and Representative DelBene doesn't answer this live, she will get back to you if there's an email to contact you. There's too many questions that we're not going to get through them in the next 10 minutes. But the next one that's popped up is from Kevin Miller. Kevin's from Kirkland. He says, Representative DelBene, thanks for taking the time today. I think most of us are here because we're extremely concerned about the quality of our air and water. But from what I've learned over recent months, there's likely a huge financial opportunity for whatever country can become a world leader in climate tech. Do you think the Democratic Party is doing a good enough job highlighting the economic opportunity of addressing climate change? And if no, what are some reasons why not?
So personally, I try to do this on a regular basis. So I think we have done a good job of highlighting the opportunities that are available. And I think in our state, actually, we also have been a great example because we're innovators and because there's been such a focus in our state on clean renewable energy. I think that that what we see here may not be replicable in other parts of the country. And so your point is fair there, and we have to do a better job to bring some of the learnings that we've had to make sure that others not only see that, but understand that there are opportunities available to them. We might understand there are economic opportunities here, but in other economies, especially if there are economies that are energy dependent or even sources of carbon fuels, it's a harder thing to think about switching over. And so I think there is much more of an opportunity there to share those stories. And I think that as we look to transition, workforce is going to be very important. We've worked on a lot of legislation. One piece of legislation I haven't talked about yet is the Green Act. The Green Act is a comprehensive approach to combating climate change using the tax code. So the Green Act was included in our infrastructure bill, and it would incentivize in renewable energy and use and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but it would put tax incentives in place. It would extend and expand several tax incentives to promote renewable energy sources and reduce emissions. And so I talk about that because also part of the innovation is the ability for folks to invest. And if we're going to see investments in innovation, like we see in our startup communities and other areas, people have to see that path forward. One of the challenges, and you know see this in different places, is solar and wind, and there were tax credits to help, but they had to be renewed every year. It was hard to get some investments in there if people weren't sure if Congress was going to renew those tax credits every year to help those businesses going forward. So I also think a big role that we can play is providing some of that longer term visibility and certainty, because I think that brings in a lot of investment and provides that opportunity for innovation and also a chance for businesses to scale. So that piece of legislation, and again, it was included in the Moving Forward Act, is another piece that I think would help address some of the issues that you're bringing up.
Great. Do we have time for one last question?
Yeah, if we end quick, we might. I haven't seen what the rest are, so you have to tell me what it is.
Okay, so this one is, we're looking for things that we've not touched on yet. This is from Sarah Richards from Kirkland. She notes that pipeline or fracked, AKA natural gas, is still believed to be, by many, to be an interim answer to climate action. Yet it's a powerful greenhouse gas with health and safety concerns. Expanding gas infrastructure doesn't seem to make financial sense because it needs to be phased out to address climate. What is happening on a national scale to change the perception that pipeline gas is clean energy and to discourage its use?
Well, so the bill that we passed, the Clean Economy Jobs Bill, has provisions to make sure that we're looking towards establishing programs and grants to help states improve their energy performance and energy efficiency. But we also have to look at kind of what the long-term issues are in terms of moving forward to alternative energies, distribution, even kind of retrofitting, what might be required in different areas to retrofit. So I do think that we all have work to do to not just talk about what we think the future looks like, but also talk about how the transition would work. And I do think that part of the work that's been going on has been to think about how we transition from the worst types of energy that we use, so that we are transitioning away. I know coal has been a big focus for that reason, but absolutely, when we talk about reducing our carbon footprint, we've got to look at all types of fossil fuels, and so that's got to be part of the long-term plan across the board. But we have to look again at the entire ecosystem to be able to build out alternatives, to make sure there's affordability, and again, look at all the pieces like, what does that mean for a homeowner somewhere, and how would they make that change? So I think there's a lot of work to be done there, so that we kind of continue to move towards that goal.
Well, there are some really great questions here that we won't get to on environmental justice, dealing with climate deniers on key committees, more on carbon pricing, and on using public banking to fund infrastructure. They're excellent questions. I hope you will have time to get back to all the folks that asked them.
Yes, please, as I said, please make sure we'll capture all the ones that are in the chat. And if you have other questions afterwards, our website is delbene.house.gov, and there's a place in there you can send email with more information. Email's a little easier. You can also call our office, but we're all teleworking during the pandemic too, so email might be a little faster if you're able to do that.
Okay. Well, we'll turn it back over to you, Congresswoman, for your closing remarks.
Well, thanks, Mark. Thank you, Lee, for bringing us all together to focus on this incredibly important subject, and for sharing so much of your time today. This is a huge priority for all of us, and it needs to be. We have to address the climate crisis, protect our environment, and make sure that we have a healthy future for our families. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I appreciate your feedback and your knowledge. Ask questions, but also I know folks have been great about kind of pointing out different ideas and highlighting issues that might not be on our radar yet. So please feel free to share that information too. Again, if we didn't get to your question today, reach me through my website at delbene.house.gov, and we'll follow up with you. And thanks, folks, so much for taking the time. And I just hope that everyone can stay safe and stay healthy during this challenging time.
Well, and we know that all the members of CCL that are here deeply appreciate the time you've taken. So thanks to you and your staff for all the efforts that you did to carve out the time for us. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. And
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone who attended.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye. Thank you so much.